Welcome back, friends. It was another busy weekend of 40K tournaments, and I got all the data here for you. So sit back, relax, and let's get to it. Before I get started, we'll do the old YouTube pleasantries. If you liked the video, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps push that video out there for more people to see. If you really liked it, don't forget to subscribe to make sure you get all my latest videos. And if you're looking for any other ways to help support me or support the channel, you can visit my Patreon, patreon.com/warpfriends. Link is in the description below. Any help is greatly appreciated. All right, guys, let's get started. First up is the player numbers for the previous week. So last week we had 1,482 players, bringing the Dataslate total up to 5,957. Games played was 7,508, bringing the Dataslate total up to 30,446. We had 28 tournaments, bringing the Dataslate total up to 101. All right, so first up is the win percentage by armies for the previous week. So just a quick reminder, Games Workshop acceptable win rate is 45 to 55%. Anything within that range will be in green. Anything 5% above or below will be in orange. Anything above or below that will be in red. Coming in number one last week was Thousand Sons, 53.7%. Then we had Aeldari at 53.7 as well. Then we had Black Templars at 53.2, Chaos Demons at 52.5, and Chaos Knights at 52.3. And then down at the bottom, we had Agents at 40, Deathwatch at 43.1, Orcs at 44.1, Drukhari at 44.8, and Dark Angels at 45.4. So overall, I mean, this was a really great week. We had no armies above 55% win rate, which is the first time in a long time. Thousand Sons had a really good bounce back week, and Aeldari maintained their strong performance. Overall, like I said, no one really dominated this week. A little bit of a disappointment down at the bottom there. Drukhari was their first week with their new codex. Started to see some of those detachments come through, and 44.8% win rate's not great. Now might take a few weeks to sort of get their legs under them, but I was kind of thinking that for Imperial Knights as well, and they haven't really gone anywhere yet either. Still this week, they're at just under 48%. So I know people weren't too excited about the Codex when it first leaked. So if there's any Drukhari players out there, let me know what you guys think about the Codex. How has the first few games felt for you? Are you sort of down on it, excited for anything? You think there's a little more play there than they might be showing so far? So just let me know. Again, I can't really complain. This has been a pretty great time after a pretty turbulent last 3 months. This so far, the first 5 weeks here has been going really well, and this week is no exception. All right, next up is the army representation for the previous week. So this is a percentage of players who play each army. So if everyone played every army equally, there'd be about 3.6, 3.7%. So you can get an idea of how many players are playing each army. So at the top, you have World Eaters at 7.4%. You have Space Marines at 7.4 as well. Death Guard at 6.3. Aeldari at 5.8. And then we have a big drop down to Tau at 4.3. And down at the bottom, we have Agents at 0.1, Deathwatch at 0.7, Genestealers at 1.4, Thousand Sons at 2.3, and then Drukhari at 2.4. And so overall, this chart looks okay. There's still always going to be those outliers at the top, Space Marines and Aeldari and Death Guard. They've been popular for a long time. World Eaters is one that's kind of made that jump up since the Dataslate dropped. Not really 100% sure where the surge of players is coming from, because it's not like they're dominating in the win percentages or tournament wins or anything like that. So if there's anyone out there who might have any insights onto that, please let me know. I'd always appreciate that. Overall, besides the few outliers at the top, everything's looking really good. Most of the armies are in the green. There's only a couple down in the red below, and that's, Deathwatch and Imperial Agents are almost always down there. Tau had a big jump up. Chaos Knights kind of is maintaining their high player base. Imperial Knights is finally starting to drop down a little bit. I think people are finally starting to abandon ship. It's still right around the meta average, at 3.8%, but I have a feeling it's going to keep going down week over week here until it kind of settles into where it kind of wants to be around 3.5% probably. Nothing really too much to complain about. This chart's never going to be perfectly balanced or perfectly even. You're always going to have those outliers at the top. So, taking those into consideration, I think we're doing pretty good. All right, next up is the combined stats for the previous week. So we have army win rates, XOX1 percentage, and representation. So just a quick reminder, XOX1 percentage is the percentage of players who went undefeated or only one loss at a tournament. So 5-0 or 4-1 as an example. It's not a perfect stat, but it's a good way to sort of relate it to the win percentage to see how an army is doing. The higher XOX1, the more likely you're going to see those armies at the top tables and with a better chance to win a tournament. So coming in number one last week, we have Aeldari. Then we have Deathwatch, Sisters of Battle, Genestealer Cults, and Chaos Knights. And then down at the bottom, we have Agents, Drukhari, Custodes, Space Wolves, and Dark Angels. Aeldari performed really well this week. They had a huge XOX1 percentage, mostly led through Warhost and Aspect Host. Really high representation, so not surprising to see them dominating so much. They still pulled out a few wins, but not as many you'd kind of expect with those numbers. Other than that, Deathwatch had a really high XOX1, but they only had 12 players, so having 3 or 4 of those players do really well is not too crazy with such a small sample size. But then you still had Sisters, Genestealers, and Chaos Knights all kind of coming in right around the same there. Anywhere from 24 to 21% XOX1, same as Tau, all performed really well. That's above average. Those are performing good. And then you have the armies in the middle there. Tyranids, Grey Knights, Chaos Space Marines, Ashram Eltarum, Black Templars, they're all performing right around the average. And, overall, this is really not that bad. There's only 3 armies at the bottom who don't have at least a 10% to XOX1. Now, 10% is not like what you want to shoot for, as the average is about 15 to 16%. But you have Space Wolves and Custodes, both just under 10. And then Drukhari, they're really the only one who's suffered last week, and they're at 5.6. And again, new codex. We'll see what happens there. But early returns are not looking good. So hopefully they can pick it up a little bit. Scary's got his work cut out for him. He's going to have to start carrying this even harder than before. Overall, it looks good. Looks great. Aeldari had a crazy week with XOX1 percentage and kind of catapulted them way to the top. But you take that out of the equation and we got a really balanced chart. Everything's looking pretty good. There's stuff to quibble with here and there, but nothing like we have been dealing with. All right, next up we have the detachment results from the previous week. So this is the top detachments by win rate with at least a minimum representation of about 1%. I kept the representation about 1% because after that it starts getting into some pretty low sample sizes. If you do 0.5% as an example this week, we'd only be looking at a detachment with potentially 6 or 7 players. So I think that's a little bit too low. It kind of starts getting into some weird territory with 1 or 2 players could really skew some results. So keep it at 1% for now. We'll see how it goes. So coming in number 1 last week was Shadowmark. Number 2 was Star Shatter. And then we had Warpbane Task Force, Aspect Host, and Infernal Lance. So again, another quick reminder there, all the generic Space Marine detachments, Iron Storm, Gladius, they're all lumped together. I was going to separate them out, but you guys mentioned that it'd probably be good just to leave them together. I didn't really see anyone agreeing with my idea to separate them, so I'm going to leave them together for now. So Shadowmark for Space Marines, this new detachment is doing really, really well. Another week up near the top. This one 57%. Necrons had a really good week with Star Shatter, 57%. Aspect Host for Aeldari had 3.5% of the representation. So 3.5% of all players were playing Aspect Host and had almost a 56% win rate. And then they were in there again with Warhost, and they had a 51.5% with another 1.5% of the player base. So between those 2 detachments, Aeldari had 5% of all the players at the tournament. So clearly anyone who is taking Aeldari is either taking Aspect Host or Warhost. It's always fun to see which armies everyone is leaning into one specific detachment. Like Berserker Warband has 6.7% of the player base, so pretty much everybody playing World Eaters is playing Berserker Warband. And then you have armies like Aeldari, who is split between 2 of them, and even Infernal Lance for Chaos Knights, 3.3% of the player base. So most of the Chaos Knight players are playing Infernal Lance as well. So it's an interesting chart. You get to see how individual detachments are doing. You can kind of see which detachments are kind of propping up each army. All right, next up is the tournament wins for each army last week. So last week, Aeldari had 3, and then World Eaters, Tyranids, Tau, Space Marines, Sisters, Necrons, Chaos Space Marines, Chaos Knights, Chaos Demons, and Asher Militarum all had 2. And we had Thousand Suns, Space Wolves, Grey Knights, Death Guard, and Dark Angels all with 1. So Thousand Suns to pick up their first win of the Dataslate, so that's nice to see. Again, tournament wins continue to be spread out, just like everything else. A widespread across a ton of different armies. This is great to see. This is about as perfect as you can get, I would say, for having 28 tournaments and only 1 army with 3 wins as the top. That's really good. And now we have the sub-faction tournament wins for the previous week. So just to get an idea, you can kind of break down how each army is getting their wins. So Aspect Host for Aeldari picked up all 3 wins. Shadowmark for Space Marines picked up both of theirs. Berserker Warband, no surprise there, based on the representation, picked up all of theirs for World Eaters. And again, same thing with Chaos Knights. Infernal Lance picked up there too. Other than that, it's spread against a bunch of different detachments as well, which is also great to see because it's not just, for the most part, it's not just one detachment dominating within each army. There's a little bit of love spread across some of the different detachments within the army, which shows a lot more variation within the meta, which is really good to see. Now we have the current win percentage by armies for the Dataslate. So this is the last 5 weeks of data. Again, a quick reminder, Games Workshop acceptable win rate is 45 to 55%. Anything within that range will be in green. Anything 5% above or below will be in orange. And anything above or below that will be in red. So coming in number 1 so far, Adeptus Mechanicus still 55.9%. And then we have Sisters of Battle at 53.6%. Grey Knights at 52.1%, Aeldari at 52.1%, and Custodes at 51% right on the dot. Then down to the bottom, we have Agents at 41.8%, Drukhari at 45.9%, Knights at 46.1%, Emperor Children at 46.3%, and then Orcs at 46.5%. Not too much to complain about here. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this chart because there's really nothing to complain about. Even AdMech at the number 1 at 55.9%, they're just barely over 55%. And I have a feeling they're going to come down in the next couple weeks. I don't think they can quite maintain that high. Other than that, everyone's in the green and there's really not anyone dominating. And it's a really refreshing change versus the last, little while we've been going through where it seems there's always been like a boogeyman kind of dominating everything. Great to see, and I hope it keeps up. And now we have the army representation for the current data slate. So this is, again, last 5 weeks of data. The average representation about 3.7%. So if everyone was playing every army equally, we'd be around 3.7% across the board. So you can get an idea of who's kind of playing each army. Coming in number 1, we have Space Marines at 6.7, World Leader at 6.7, Aeldari at 6.3, Death Guard at 5.9, and then Tau at 4.6. And then down the bottom, we have Agents at 0.3, Death Watch at 0.9, Chinsho's at 1.4, Drukhari at 2, and Thousand Suns at 2% as well. So you just have to accept that there's always going to be those outliers at the top and the bottom. Just so many factors that go into representation. People love specific armies and play specific armies because they're their favorite. Win percentage goes into it. Tournament wins go into it. How much it costs to collect. How easy it is to paint. Availability. There's so many different things. So there's always going to be outliers, and those ones at the top are usually at the top, and the ones at the bottom are usually at the bottom. So you kind of got to look in the middle there and kind of get a good idea. And for the most part, that middle is fairly close. There's a few above, a few below the average, but overall, I think we're looking pretty good. All right, next up is the combined stats for the current data slate. So again, the last 5 weeks of data for win percentage, XOX1 percentage, and representation. Just a quick reminder, XOX1 percentage is the percentage of players who went undefeated or only one loss at a tournament. Example, like 5-0 or 4-1. Again, it's not a perfect stat, but it's a good way to correlate it with win percentage to see how an army is doing. The higher the XOX1, the more likely you're going to see them at the top tables with a better chance to win tournament. Coming in number 1, we have Aeldari, then Sisters of Battle, Admech, Tau, and Grey Knight. Then down at the bottom, we have Agents, Imperial Knights, Thousand Suns, Emperor Children, and then Astra Militarum. This chart is actually looking the best out of almost all of them. After 5 weeks, there's really no one army dominating. No one's running away with the XOX1. The highest is Sisters at 21%, which is like insane considering we've seen like upwards of like multiple armies over 22-23% for a whole data slate. So we only have one army below 10% XOX1, that's Knights, and it's at 9%, so it's pretty close. You have to excuse Agents because they're just such a low representation that it's hard to get any meaningful data out of it. But I mean, overall, this chart is almost like as balanced as you're gonna get. I don't expect to see it much more balanced than this, and I'm really happy with what I'm seeing. All right, now we're looking at the detachment results for the current data slate. So again, we have win percentage and detachment representation here, and looking at any detachment that has over 1% of the player base. Coming in number 1 is Shadowmark at 60.7%. Then we have Stormlands at 55.2%, Halo's Creed at 55.1%, Warpbane at 54.7%, and then Warhost at 54%. So you can look at this chart and just compare it to the Armies Win percentages and get a good idea of where they're kind of getting their wins. Shadowmark's around 60% win rate. I don't think Space Marines are even at 50%, so you can clearly tell that everyone playing Shadowmark's doing really well, and everyone playing all the other detachments is doing not so well. But I mean, overall, this actually looks pretty good. You have a few detachments here with a little too much representation, like Berserker Warband. You'd like to see that sort of siphoned off a bit. World Leaders really only have one option there for any play because clearly everybody is just playing Berserker Warband. Virulent Victorium for Death Guard is still getting 3.5% of the player base. Again, most players are still playing that detachment. It is spread out a little bit more than it was, but it's still a really high percentage based on the number of players they have. And same for Aeldari. Aspect House is doing really, really well. And again, they're at almost 4% of the player base. So there's a few armies there where you'd like to see that clearly they're kind of the favorite within the faction and doing really well and could probably use a little bit of adjustment. But overall, the chart looks really good. So next up, we have Army Tournament wins for the current data slate, and it's broken down week over week, and each week is represented by a different color, so you can kind of get an idea of how and when each army is getting their wins. So Aeldari's number 1 with 10. Then we have Tau and Space Marines with 8. Chaos Demons with 7, and then we have Knights, Astra Militarum, and Admech with 6. Then we have a bunch of other people with 5, one with 4, a couple with 3, 2, and 1. We still have 4 without a win. Templars, Deathwatch, Emperor's Children, and Agents. Thousand Suns did pick up their first win, so that's good to see. So hopefully we can get one of those other ones a win here soon. Aeldari is number 1 with 10. They're really not dominating, so overall, this chart looks really great. It's hard to get mad about too much right now. Aeldari is clearly kind of the top army when it comes to sort of overall performance, but they're not like ruining the meta like it was with Death Guard and Imperial Knights last data slate. All right, for the first faction look at this week, we're going to take a look at Tau. Taking a look at the previous 8 weeks here, you can see that since the data slate dropped, they've actually been getting some pretty good results. The representation is up from about 3% to about 4.5-5% on average, and the win percentage is anywhere from like 47-48% up to over 50% for the last 4 weeks there. Looking at the stats for some at average, you can see they're doing pretty well. Their win percentage is just above average at 50.8 versus 49. Our armor representation is 4.6 versus 3.6. XOX1 is where they're excelling the most at 20.8 versus 15.4, and they have 8 tournament wins versus the average of 3.7. Down the bottom, taking a look at the sub-faction player counts there, you can see it's pretty evenly spread. Mont'ka is the highest with 28%, but then you also have Retaliation Cadre at 21.9, you have Kroot at 12, you have Kalyan at 11, auxiliary cadre at 14, and experimental at 11. So a good spread of representation. There's no one detachment that's sort of dominating in the players, and the win percentages kind of mirror that as well. Callion has 61% win rate, which is the highest, but they also have, I think, the lowest representation. And then you have everything else right around 50%. Auxiliary cadre is at 56.3, but looking at everything else, it's anywhere from like 47 to 57%. Experimental protocol is down at 35. That's the one outlier who's really kind of suffering. But other than that, every other detachment's performing very well. And the tournament wins are also spread across almost all the detachments. Mont'ka has 3, Crude has 2, Retaliation has 1, Callion has 1, and Auxiliary Cadre has 1. So overall, I think Tau is in a really good spot. They're doing really, really well with like the top end there, getting lots of tournament wins and a high XOX1 percentage, and getting a good representation across all their different detachments and a good win percentage across all their detachments. So after struggling for a little while, Tau's kind of really bounced back in a positive way, and they're in a pretty good spot. So any Tau players out there, let me know what you guys think. How are you enjoying the army since the changes, and what do you think has led to its big success here? For the second faction focus, we're going to take a look at Custodes. So looking at the previous 8 weeks here, we can see the representation has jumped up quite a bit since the Dataslate dropped, anywhere from like 3 to 4% up to 4.5 to almost 5%. And the win percentage has been anywhere from 50 to 55%. A little bit of a dip this week, but overall really good results. The stats versus the meta average are pretty much right around the average. Win percentage is 51 to 49%. Army representation is 4.1 to 3.6. A little bit down in the XOX1, 15.4 to 13.4. So kind of struggling a little bit there to sort of get those top end results. And the tournament wins only have 1 versus the average of 3.7. Looking at the subfaction player count there, you can see Lines of the Emperor is eating up a majority of the players and almost 65% of the player base. Shield Host has 18% and Solar Spearhead has 12. So there's a few players there, but pretty much everyone is playing Lions of the Emperor. And looking at their win percentages for the sub-factions, Lions is actually doing pretty well, almost 52% win rate. Talons is 54, Solar Spearhead's 52. Shield Host is the second highest for player count, but it's just under 45%. And then you have Null Maiden, which has, I think, only a handful of players total, and Orc Champions again, which is just a handful of players total. Overall, Shield Host is kind of dragging the results down a little bit. If that detachment was doing better, I think their win percentage would be a percentage or two higher, because everything else is at least almost 52%. But overall, Custodes is in a really good spot, getting really good results. You'd like to see them a little bit higher in those top tables, a little bit better results at, finishing a tournament and getting a win, or at least getting close to it, but still within that really good, acceptable range and performing really well. Custodes players out there, let me know what you guys think. How's your army sort of been feeling after the changes? What do you think is the big contributor to getting a little bit better results? And what do you think is kind of holding them back from getting to those top tables? And that is it for this week, guys. Thanks for watching. Huge shout out to my Patreon members, Meet the Great, John Gurman, William, Viz, and Staic. Your support means the world to me. It's been a lot more work. Again, I say this every week, but it is something I enjoy and something I'm going to keep doing. And everyone who helps support me over at Patreon makes it a little bit easier each week. Good luck in the tournaments coming up this weekend, guys, and I'll see you next week.